Well, hi everybody, and welcome back. We're on to Unit 3. And just as a recap, in Unit 2, you read Kent Howard's article. Kent is a great guy, by the way, if you ever want the opportunity to talk to him and pick his brain on this stuff. That article is one of those ones that I suggest you put in your toolbox. When you leave Slippery Rock, you're going to want to have some of your best work and some of the stuff that you came across. Keep a couple of textbooks. Don't keep them all. I didn't keep all of mine. Why should you keep all of yours? But there'll be a couple of things you're going to want to keep, and I suggest that article is one that you're going to want to keep. Excuse me. So we talked about ESRM and how it's a way for security to embed themselves, if you will, with the other parts of the business to understand the real risks to the business, and then to work as a subject matter expert to help mitigate those risks. So rather than, again, just throwing up guards and gates and guns and alarms and card readers and cameras all over the place and saying, I've secured my facility, you may have done that, but that's just the tip. That's just somebody breaking in. You don't understand what might happen if something happens to a resource inside the facility through an insider threat and what those important resources are. Or if something doesn't get where it needs to be, if it's being transported in and out of the facility and it doesn't get there because of supply chain vulnerabilities. So ESRM is your way to interface with the business, to understand what the real risks to the business are, and to gear your program so that it gets the most impact. And in doing so, you have to form relationships with people and you have to understand what they do. So this week and the several weeks coming up, we're going to go over different parts of an organization and talk about what their functions are and how there's some overlap with security and how you might be able to, for lack of a better term, exploit some of that overlap to make friends, influence people, and to get into those organizations so you can do your job better and be a better security manager. So what does human resources really do? And you've all heard the term. It used to be called personnel, then it went to human resources. And everybody thinks, okay, human resources, those are the people that hire you and get you your paycheck. And really, nothing could be farther from the truth. So human resources has really 6 distinct roles across most organizations. And again, there are some organizations where human resources may also have occupational health. They may also have employee engagement and experience. So they would have cafeterias, and if you have a little store in your place of business, which a lot of big businesses have, like a convenience store right on campus, if you will, they might run that to enhance their employee experience. But basically, they have 6 really tight functions here that are really across most organizations. And the first one is recruitment, right? They put the ads out to try to hire somebody. If you're a manager and you say, I need to have somebody to run my big machine, and they need to have 5 years of big machine experience, and they need to have a degree in big machinery, and they need to be able to work the night shift, you give that form to human resources, and they go out and try to find you candidates for that role. So recruitment and the hiring process. Now that's an important distinction here because HR doesn't really do the hiring. It may seem that way because they may send you an offer letter, or that's who you talk to and you get interviewed by them. They're really just doing a basic interview to verify what you put in your resume and to make sure that there are no big red flags. The hiring person is always the hiring manager, no matter where you go. So they take care of the hiring process. So getting you to fill out the right forms, doing your background check or having your background check done, which you'll see here in a minute. But the hiring process and recruitment belongs to HR. In many organizations, workplace safety, especially in smaller organizations, falls to human resource. Although human resources does have some workplace safety reporting requirements to do, and so they always have a hand in workplace safety, even if the environmental health and safety department, if you will, falls to someone else. Employee relations, by employee relations, I mean basic investigations of employee misconduct that is not a security violation. So an employee is insubordinate to their boss, right? Boss says, I need you to go do this. Guy says, no, I'm not doing that. You just, get away from me. I don't even want to talk to you. Insubordination. That's the type of employee relations investigations that HR does. And sometimes they can get quite serious, but still not be a security function. So they do investigations as well as security doing them. Compensation and benefits. Again, they don't decide how much of a raise you get, but they go out and they do comparisons with the local markets to see how much people make in certain jobs, and then they can set limits on how much that job will pay in their organization. They also interface with benefits managers in things like healthcare and retirement benefits and dental plans and legal plans and all the things that you can hope to get in benefits. HR is responsible for making those contracts with people and then making them, having them offered to employees. Labor law compliance. Normally you have employment attorneys, and sometimes they work for HR, sometimes they work for a separate organization, but they have to make sure that labor law is complied with. When you go into most workplaces, you will see on the bulletin board, even if you work in retail, when you go back by the time clock, there'll be a bulletin board and there'll be things tacked up to it that say U.S. Department of Labor, and most of the time someone's torn a small piece off the corner to, put their gum in or write down a phone number before they forget it. But those things are all required by law, and HR is required to make sure postings and notifications of labor law are posted properly. And then training and development almost always falls to human resources, even if it's training on things that are very specific to an operation. So training and development, meaning the ongoing training you get, the initial training you get when you come to a company, and then the ongoing training you have on policies, procedures, and your job normally falls to HR to develop those things, to write the classes, to make them, if they're online tutorials or if they're in-person classes, to arrange those things. So these are the 6 basic functions of a standard human resources role. And if you haven't printed out the slides, as I hope you will, because I really think it's a good tool to take notes on, because when you take the quiz, you're done in like 5 minutes if you take your notes on the slides. But so it's your life, your call. But if you didn't print them out, write these 6 things down before you go on to the next slide, because we're going to refer back to the 6, and they won't be readily available to you, and I don't want to have you flip back and forth. So take the time to either make sure you've printed out this slide or write these things down. So of those 6 things, every one of them has some form of crossover to the security manager. And finding those crossovers, finding the common things that you and someone who runs another department does, is key to forming that relationship with them, and then to understanding and having an open discussion about the risks that they have. So where's the crossover with security when it comes to hiring? Well, the first one always is background checks and background check adjudication. So a background check, and you'll hear me say this a couple times, is not an evaluation. You won't get a background check that comes back and said this person is clear to work for you. You will get a background check that comes back and says this person has no known convictions. Or it will come back and it will say they were convicted 20 years ago for, failure to appear on a parking ticket or something, right? It won't say this isn't a really important thing or they're still okay to work because we've done the check. It's just an evaluation. They're only going to report things that are in the record that are eligible to be reported, like no crimes of youth and certain no arrest records, just convictions, okay? And you set the parameters, HR sets the parameters normally of 7 years or 3 years. We just want to go back that far. You don't want to go back 30 years. It doesn't do you much good. And those background checks will come back, and sometimes they have things on there that you wouldn't necessarily not have the person work for you, but it is a conviction. And so that adjudication is something that you will work on as a security manager. And we'll get to what adjudication really means in this case in another slide. So don't worry, we're going to come back to that if you don't understand it. The rehire and no hire stances. So if someone comes to work for your company and they are fired with cause for something that they did, like that insubordination, you as a security manager wouldn't necessarily know that they were fired with cause. You knew that John was here and then John left, right? It's a small enough company, you may know him by first name and just know the guy's not here anymore. You heard the rumors, but you can't go by those. But they may have him marked in the HR records as not rehireable. We don't want this guy back. There was something egregious that happened, and we have determined that if he ever comes back, we just don't want to rehire him. And those stances are something as a security manager you need to know, because guess what? If John comes in for an interview with somebody, or even if he comes in for a position as a contracted labor person, where HR wouldn't necessarily see him, he's going to come through your visitor management program. He's going to come through your front desk, your guard at the gate, if you will. It's going to be the one that lets them in. So you need to have some crossover when they take a stance on someone for a no hire or a no rehire stance. You need to know that. Non-compete and non-disclosure agreements are something that people in certain levels normally will sign. I have a non-disclosure, non-compete agreement. So certain things that I learn in my job, I can't take to the next job and use. And those people who sign those things often forget they signed them. And especially when we're talking about researchers, people who are doing product development, They go to the next company and they take that big idea they found at company A and they take it to company B, and company B sells the product and makes millions and trillions of dollars. Skip the billions, just millions and trillions, right? They violated a non-compete, non-disclosure agreement, and company A comes back to company B and says, guess what? We need to recoup the loss. Your guy took our idea with him when he left. He signed an agreement saying he wouldn't do that. He wouldn't exploit any idea he came up with or was he learned while he was working for us. And he did that, so we would like half the profits. Oftentimes when people leave a company, security is tasked with inventorying the things they take with them. And knowing whether a person has a non-compete or non-disclosure agreement may have a great impact on whether you want to do that by yourself or whether you want their boss with you, who knows what some of the documents and effects they're taking with them actually mean. So in my case, someone who's working on oncology, right, cancer research, I know nothing about cancer research. If they're leaving the company and they want to take personal effects with them on their last day, and someone calls and said, can we get someone from security to go and inventory the things they are taking? I would definitely take with me somebody from that person's line of work that knows oncology, so they know what that document actually means and whether it's sensitive and whether it should leave. But you have to know there's a non-compete or non-disclosure in effect, and HR would know that because it's something they have people sign when they come to work for a company. And then termination processes and protections. And this one's a huge one, and it's something that no matter what level you go into in security management and safety management for that matter, you should think about when people leave the company under less than ideal circumstances, someone has to tell them they're leaving. And those processes need to be practiced, they need to be written down, who delivers it, where they deliver the news, and what are the next steps. I have seen managers call people into their office deep into a facility, so far away from the front door you couldn't get there, in half a day. Sit them down and say, your work is substandard, we've gone through this before, you're terminated. And the person says, okay. And then they don't know what to do next. Do I walk them out? Do I take them to HR? Do I have someone clean out their desk? And they say, well, I want to go back to my work area because I have the pictures of the family there. Do you let them go back to the work area? People don't think about the process of termination. It should always be done at a door close to the front of the facility if possible. An HR person should probably be in the room and a security person in the next room in case there is trouble. Sometimes people react badly. But those are the types of things that you have to think about that are a crossover between security and HR when it comes to hiring. And now we'll look at the other 6 a little quicker. You get the idea that there are crossovers, and understanding those crossovers means you have some shared risk. And by the way, you'll see some repeats on this because some of them are just the same issue but a different flavor and from a different view. Like workplace safety. What's the crossover between workplace safety and security? Especially from the HR stance, if HR is handling it. Well, crisis management and business continuity. Right? Crisis management, so you have crisis response, right? If there's a fire, you have first responders, and that's a crisis response. Crisis management really comes from the people who lag back and understand what do we need to do. Okay, we need to get responders in, we need to get the chemicals that are in that area out, we need to make sure people are accounted for. And then we have business continuity people. Once the fire's out, what are we going to do? How are we going to get back up and running? If we lose a lot of raw materials, how are we going to get those? Who are those suppliers? How quick can they replenish? All of those things really meld together with safety, security, and HR. And those are definite crossovers that need discussion between the 3. Termination processes, again, workplace safety. If someone takes that bad news badly, you could have a workplace violence issue, right? Same with the hire, no hire stance. Those are safety issues if somebody gets in that shouldn't or someone that's supposed to be leaving doesn't, which is why you work together with HR and safety on workplace violence policies. Same with acceptable conduct policies, the things you can and cannot do or should not do. All of those things have a security flavor to them, a workplace safety flavor to them, and an HR flavor to them. And my favorite one is personal protection orders. Oftentimes people get personal protection orders or trying to remember what they're called in some of the eastern states. But it's basically an order of the court saying that you can't come within a certain distance of someone. PPO is the current common term for that. If someone gets a personal protection order because of domestic problem, right, in a divorce, it's very common for husbands and wives to have, a lot of problems in a divorce, and the wife gets a personal protection order because the husband had made threats. They sometimes will take that to either their manager or to HR. And HR takes it and says, okay, great, we have this. If they don't share it with the security department, that person could show up at the door, and we have no idea that the quickest way to get them out is to call the police, hand them a copy of that PPO, and watch them go to jail, which is the proper way to handle that. But there's a lot of crossovers between workplace safety and security and HR. And understanding, again, what those crossovers are helps you ferret out the shared risk. So employee relations, we talked about employee relations and what that is. And it is essentially a part of HR that deals with investigating issues between employees. And they oftentimes will at some point rise to a security incident. You'll find out that someone makes an actual threat against someone else. Communicating a threat generally falls to the security department to investigate. But the intake may go through employee relations. Someone may walk into HR and say, I'm tired of Brian. Brian's always threatening. He's going to kick my ass if I don't do this and I don't do that. Right? And employee relations takes the intake on that case. And they may, after talking to the person, say, the term kick somebody's ass didn't really mean that they were physically going to kick somebody. They were making a statement that is inappropriate in the workplace, and this is something that we want to sit down with these two employees and hash out what the problem is and get them back to work and make them effective for the company, right? Because we don't want to fire people. So, we don't want to fire people because it's expensive, by the way. So they intake. Well, sometimes when the person leaves their office, they say, I didn't get the rise out of HR I thought I was going to get. And they walk to the security office and they make the same complaint. And if you don't understand what the other side is doing, if you don't understand that the person's already been to HR, you really need to ask them, because a lot of times you don't, and you find out they've already made the complaint to HR, and in some cases they've already been to the local police department. So the police may be investigating it if the person gave them one story. HR may be investigating it, and so are you. And those investigations run into each other pretty quickly, and they're usually not a pretty sight. Okay, so employee relations, the whole idea of who's investigating who is something that you definitely want to have coordination with. Something that I pride myself on. We have really good coordination. We have an employee relations department that's part of HR. It's almost a separate entity. In fact, it is a separate entity off of HR. And we work very well together on who's going to take what case and look at the intake and decide where it goes. But in a smaller company, that doesn't always happen. Employee relations has to understand the workplace violence policies, which you are generally responsible as the security manager for writing. So you're going to want their input onto what you put in as far as punishments in those things. You want to always put at the end of workplace violence that violating this policy may result in termination, because you never know when you're going to draw that line when it comes to a violence policy. But you want their input into the violence policy, and you want to make sure they understand it. Same thing with all the acceptable conduct policies that either you write or they write. There needs to be coordination. And then again, discipline, termination, suspensions. If employee relations puts somebody on suspension, what happens when they don't tell security and that person comes back in lunchtime and says, hey, I forgot my badge, can I get it in? Normally they'd be issued a visitor badge or just verify that they are indeed an employee and be let back in. So coordination, crossovers between employee relations and security, hugely important. Now I hope you're getting the idea here. If you know the basic functions of another department and what they do, you can break down those basic functions and say, how does security get involved in this? What crossover do we have? What tie-in do we have to that particular function? We're going to do this with a lot of different departments, and the idea is not only will you learn about what these departments do, which is hugely important when you get to your first job. If nothing else, I would suggest that we should have a course for everybody who's going to go into any kind of business function, which is what security is a business function, to understand how businesses are and organizations are set up generally in business, because I think it helps you when you get in the front door to understand who's who. So if no other benefit, you're going to learn about that, right? Compensation and benefits, though. So let's jump to compensation and benefits. A huge important part of HR. And benefits fraud is a big problem, and people don't understand it. And I will tell you that normally benefits fraud comes from one area, and that is medical benefits. In the U.S., we have privatized medical benefits, and it is not uncommon for people to try to sneak someone onto their medical benefits that is not entitled to be there. So eventually they get caught because the insurance companies will ask for records and eventually drop the person off. But for the course of a year, let's say, so if I go in open enrollment and I enroll my daughter is 29 years old. She is no longer eligible to be on my medical, but let's just say her husband, she's on his medical insurance, and he decides to take her off to save some money, and I say, I'll just pop you on mine, and I'll say you're 25, right? Say you're going to school and you're 25. She graduated a few years ago from Western Michigan. She's not going to school currently. She's working, and she's not 25. She's 29. But I say she's a student. She's 25. I put her on my medical insurance, and from the day I enroll, she'll go on there. And it will take several months by the time the insurance company comes back to me and says, okay, I would like to see her birth certificate, and I would like to see proof she is a student. And during those several months, the company has paid for her medical benefits, because you pay some, but your company pays a lot more. I can tell you my own medical insurance, the company pays about twice what I do each year for my medical insurance. It's a benefit. It's a fringe benefit of working for the company. They pay a large portion of my medical insurance, and I pay a small portion. But benefits fraud does run, I won't say it runs rampant, but it is not an uncommon thing, and normally it's a more common thing with younger people, and it's one of those stopgap things. I don't know how to pay for insurance for my 29-year-old daughter, so I'm going to put her on mine and say she's 26 till I figure it out. But during those months, I'm committing benefits fraud. And there are investigations of benefits fraud. Obviously, those of you who are in the fraud minors understand how that all works. But that is definitely a crossover to the security department if indeed the security department is tasked with handling fraud, which many are. And then there's just the basic management crossover. That's compensation and benefits for your own team. As a security manager, you will likely have several people who work directly for you, and you're responsible for their care and feeding, including their compensation and benefits. Make sure they have the right information. So there's always a crossover with any management function and comp and benefits. And the security department just has that added one of helping with investigations on benefits fraud. But that's a definite tie-in to compensation and benefits. Real quick, in the labor law and compliance side, definitely there may be issues of unfair treatment under labor law that are claimed that HR investigates, and they may need security. They normally need the security department's help in investigating those matters. And the Fair Credit Reporting Act. Background checks are subject to the Fair Credit Reporting Act in the U.S., which basically means you can't do a background check, a full background check, using non-public records unless you have the person's permission to do so. They have the right to contest it, and they have a certain amount of time to come back to clear the record. Any errors in the record, you have to let them see it. And if you are active in the background check function, which sometimes security departments are very active in that function, there's about a 50-50 kind of a thing now with new hires, HR doing them or security doing them and sending them to HR. When I say doing them, I normally mean contracting for them. It's a specialty. You don't ever want to do background checks yourself. Very few people do that. You send it out to a service and they do it for you. But you want to make sure there's compliance with the Fair Credit Reporting Act. And when a hit comes on a background check, it is not at all unusual for someone to say, I want to see that report because I want to contest what's in there for various reasons. So you do have some crossover working with HR on labor law compliance. And finally, and I know this part of the last several slides have been droning on, but we're getting to a point here, guys, okay? Training and development. There's definitely a crossover training development because of security awareness programs and support of internships and other programs where you have outsiders come in for experiential training or to provide for training. So in training and development, security awareness programs are a big part of a security program, understanding everybody knows what to do and understands why they have responsibilities. You want to have those training programs. HR runs those training programs. Definitely a crossover there. You want to have friends in HR to help you with those training programs. So that's a big one right there. So what does all this mean? We've come to that point, right? Where there are shared interests, and I've shown over the last 6 slides, shared interest in every portion of an standard HR role, that there is some crossover, there's some shared interest in making sure things work between human resources and the security manager. And where there are shared interests, there are shared risks. If it goes right, you both are happy. If it goes wrong, you're both unhappy. That's shared risk. So what can the shared risk look like? Well, HR is working on the hiring process. And if they don't do the process correctly and somebody slips by, you could have a higher internal threat. I will tell you that I have found that to be the case, especially in backgrounds, when you find that you have someone who slipped through. And this is primarily with contracted help that I find at sites. So another company is doing the background check, a contractor company, and then they're sending them to one of my sites to work, right, to provide a certain service. And we find out that they do something bad, and we look back in their history, and it should have told us they were going to do something bad. A case I am working right now that those in the investigations course will hear about, we have a person who came to work as desk side support, right? They were going around and helping people who were new to the company or were getting new computer equipment, helping them set it up, collecting their old equipment, re-imaging their hard drives, putting their files from one machine onto the other, and getting them all set up to work with new computing equipment. And this particular person came to work, and he was going around doing that. And he would engage in conversations with people he was working with, and many of them bought computers that he had been working on through his other business. Unfortunately, his other business was nothing more than taking our used computers and reselling them, which obviously is something that you don't want done, especially since he wasn't always cleaning off the data when he was reselling them. And he resold 77 computers at approximately $200 a piece, is what he was getting for them. But unfortunately for him, our value was closer to $1,500 a piece on those machines based on the software, age, everything else. And so he's going to jail. Now, the moral of the story is his background check. Once I started the investigation, I went and hired somebody to do a check on public records and found out that he had spent actual prison time for stealing laptop computers from a previous employer. That crime was exactly what he did in our place. And so a bad hire meant that I had an internal threat. And that internal threat acted, and essentially I have a loss of about $25,000 in the end. So a bad hiring decision by HR can increase the security threat, either cyber or physical, inside, right? So there is definitely a shared interest in good hiring, because if not, you have the shared risk of internal threats. There's certainly a risk of parallel complaint intake that we talked about, right? You could run dual and conflicting case records and outcomes on an investigation. I get the investigation, so does HR. It comes in two different ways. We're both investigating the same case, but they find out about a witness I didn't find out about, who cleared the person. And I didn't find out about that witness, and every bit of evidence I have implicates the person. So I take the case to their manager and say, your guy is guilty of whatever, and HR is saying, don't worry about it, because they're not. We've both spent a lot of time investigating the same matter, but because it wasn't coordinated, right? We have a shared interest in sharing the data and sharing the intake, because if not, we both have the risk of coming up with different conclusions. And improper investigation processes, which is, again, something that we'll discuss in the investigations course. I don't want to get too much into it, but when you don't do an investigation properly, when you don't do it thoroughly, you actually will be sued for wrongful termination, or you'll end up in litigation, and a person will come back and say, you know, you basically gave a sham investigation and didn't get it right. And if HR is doing investigations, and so am I, we have a shared interest in doing them correctly. We have the shared risk of getting sued if we don't. So we want to be able to share our techniques and our tools for doing investigation. So there in of itself, we have shared interests, which we've shown. And here are some examples of that shared interest. If you don't share, if you don't work together, you have shared risks that will come back to haunt you. So what does shared risk really mean? It means that the ESRM stuff that we've been reading about and talking about last week is really important. Because if you share a common risk, then you might share a common solution. So in the case of the investigations, the common risk is that if we don't do an investigation properly, if we don't do it thoroughly, there's a chance that we could have somebody fired and they will come back to sue us for wrongful termination. So if we share that risk, then maybe the common solution is for us to have a single case management system that all asks the same questions, requires the same reports, requires the same follow-through when you're done on to the next level. So there's the same quality control to make sure that the same people are looking at the cases every time and saying, yep, the case was done properly, you've answered all the questions, you filled in all the blocks, you've done this right, I sign off on it, we're good, we're not going to get sued. Sometimes that happens still, but it's very little when you really go through that quality. So maybe sharing that common risk, maybe we have a common solution in having a common case management system, case approval system, and making sure that we do everything the same way every time. This shared risk validates the need for HR and security to work together, okay, and managing risks together because we have common risks. Now, HR is going to have some of their own risks that are uncommon to security, but if you can ferret out those that are common first, you have the basis for the conversation. So how can we work with HR to reduce common risks? So let's use a different example than the case management system, which is a pretty good one. This one's background checks, okay? So HR normally contracts for a report. If you're going to go to work for a company, they say, we have to do a background check on you. Sign here saying you authorize it, and you sign that in that big stack of papers you sign every time you start a job. And none of us ever remember how many times we signed our name when we started a job, but we did it a lot. We don't remember what it was for. One of those is for them to do a background check. And they'll get a background check done, normally by a reputable background check company, and there are some rather large ones out there. And they go through a 50-state check or out of country check if you've lived out of the country, and check to see if you've been arrested, if you're going to handle money, whether or not you've had any arrests for anything having to do with finances, whether you have any financial red flags like bankruptcies, very poor credit if credit report is required for some jobs, especially if you're handling money. And they'll get a report on that. And that is a statement of facts. You declared bankruptcy in 2004. It doesn't say that in 2003, you were doing okay and your significant other got cancer and it wiped out every bit of savings you had paying for medical bills. And that is why you declared bankruptcy, because you had medical bills that were just in the millions of dollars and there was no way out. I would look at that as different than someone who declared bankruptcy because they had a gambling problem, or perhaps because they just decided they needed a Mercedes-Benz when they were working at McDonald's 20 hours a week and couldn't make the payments. There really is just a statement of fact. You get back, the person declared bankruptcy in 2004. Sometimes the facts are foggy, right? I can get a disorderly conduct charge for fighting in a bar. I can get the same disorderly conduct charge for going to a peaceful protest and sitting in, and when the police tell me I have to leave, I don't leave, and I sit there and they carry me off. Now, both are disorderly conduct. I don't condone either one of those behaviors, and I don't recommend either one. But when it comes to hiring someone, would you rather have the person who's got a reputation as a bar fighter, or would you rather have the person who is trying to make a stance on something and maybe just got a little carried away? Maybe, whatever your opinion is on that. What I'm trying to say is that circumstances matter in background checks a lot of the time. Excuses don't matter, but circumstances do. And security departments normally have great relationships with courts and police. And in doing so, I can often make a call to a local police department or to someone in a prosecutor's office and say, hey, Brian was arrested 5 years ago for disorderly conduct. Do you know who the arresting officer was? Can I talk to them? Do they have any facts on the case? And the officer may tell me, oh yeah, he was drunk and he was swinging, he hit me and put me in the hospital, and this is a violent guy, I wouldn't want you to be anywhere near him. Great, I know that. Or he might say, yeah, that was that protest for the library tax nobody wanted to pay, and Brian was sitting in the door of the library, and when we told them they had to unblock the door, they wouldn't move, so we peacefully picked up people and just escorted them, processed them, and sent them home. I might hire that Brian. I really don't want the bar fighter. But the police will more likely talk to the security department. So that background check example is one way where HR and security working together have a shared risk of a bad hire, and security can help HR minimize that risk by using their contacts. So I want you to think about other shared risks with HR. As you know what HR does now, you have those 6 things, right? I want you to think about ways that security could help HR mitigate their risks. And if there's another group that might benefit from that risk mitigation, if you think about it, once we cleared that background check, the hiring organization, the place the person is going to actually work, that department, benefits from all that, because we're going to make sure that they get somebody who is reliable and isn't a big bar fighter, right? So there was a third, winner in that. And that's the actual people who are going to have to work with that person, right? So let's try together to think. I say name three. This week in your discussion, you're going to be asked to name one and to work through this process. So I'll give one more example here, and then we'll let you work on some. Okay, so now I want you to try it. Okay, try to work this formula yourself. And what you're going to do is you're going to think of an HR-related risk based on those 6 roles, right? You wrote those down. Take one of those roles and think about one thing that could be risky in there, something that could backfire. You can know enough about those functions that you could think about something in workplace safety that could be a problem that HR might have with workplace safety, or with background checks, or those types of things, right? Any of those 6 things. Think of the related risk to the security department. How might the security department also have a risk in that same thing? And then think about a way that you could work together to mitigate the risk. What things could you do together to fix a risk that you both share? And then think about another department that might have that function. I want you to shut the lecture off. I want you to just, hit pause. And I want you to write this out. Those 4 items right there. The HR-related risk. Pick any one of the 6 roles. A security department risk that's related to that. How you share in that risk, how there's things that could bite both of you, right, in that particular function. And then how might working together, you might do something or they might do something that helps you get out of that jam, right, if something goes wrong. Mitigate that risk. And then think about, well, who else gets helped if we do this? And I want you to write those things down before you go any further. Just jot down answers to those 4 items. If you shut off the lecture and were able to list 4 answers, and it makes some sense, you are practicing enterprise security risk management. You are taking shared risk between different business partners. You're going to find out what the risks are that others have, the functions they have, how their risks and your risks might match up, and how working together you can mitigate them. And it's always nice to see if somebody else gets some benefit out of that, because that helps you get support for those things that you might need to spend money on to get the risk mitigated, right? You may have to buy something. You might have to use some software, or it might require you to buy more card readers for doors, or access control readers for doors, or put alarms up or something, right? You're going to need money to do that. So the more people you can help, the more support you have, the more likely you get the money. But you are practicing enterprise security risk management when you understand that you have to go to other departments, see what their risks are, see how you can help them mitigate those risks, right? How they might affect you as well, and then try to look at downstream about how it affects other people. If you're able to do that, if you're able to list those things, if you took the time to do it, you're half done with your homework. And the reason I say you're half done with your homework is that what you just did, and writing it up as an essay, is what you're going to do for your discussion this week. So the deliverables this week are, you're going to read the short internet articles that I have. They are very short. Read those first. Then you took the lecture, which you've just done. Thank you. And now by Thursday at 5 p.m., you're going to complete your initial discussion. And that initial discussion, you'll see, looks just like what you did. You're going to look at one of the 6 functions of HR and decide on a risk that goes with one of those 6 functions based on what you know. You're going to look at how security shares in that risk, how you and HR might partner to mitigate that risk, and then look at and see who else might benefit from that good work that you and HR do together. And you are going to write that in an essay, and it is laid out in the discussion board as to how to do that. And by Thursday at 5 p.m., you'll need to submit that. You will not see the work of others before you submit your own. And it's likely you'll make some mistakes, and that's why we're here, to make the mistakes here rather than when we get to the workplace where they really count. But get that discussion done, and then between Thursday 5 p.m. and, well, in fact, if others post early enough, as soon as you post your initial post, then you'll be able to go in and do 2 responses to others. And what I want you to do is to make a comment on another way to mitigate that risk. What's one other way HR and security could have worked together on the particular risk that they found? Or somebody else that might benefit that they hadn't thought of. They might have thought of one department, but there could be another. And in 100 words each on those responses, answer back somebody and tell them what else you have discovered from reading their discussion. So, just to reinforce, the discussion is an essay. It is not a list. It is not a number one, number two, number three, as we did for introductions perhaps, but it is an essay. And then you go back after you submit your essay by 5 o'clock Thursday and do 2 comments on other people's posts. If they don't post until 5 o'clock Thursday, you're going to need to wait till after Thursday evening to go in and find people's posts to comment on, and there's no way to avoid that. Now, if I respond back to your post and you answer me back, make it at least 100 words in the answer back, that counts as one of the responses. So if I comment and I comment on posts, I'll probably comment on about a third of them based on the size of this class. I will read every one of them several times, but I will comment probably on about a third of them. And if you want to answer me back on my questions, you can count that as one of your responses. I think that's easier to do than actually go and respond on other people's posts. And if you have more than 2 responses, that may increase your grade based on the quality that you have, though. If you have good quality on your initial post and good quality on your 2 responses, you can get maximum credit. However, if you think that maybe you can juice it up a little bit by responding to a third one or a fourth one, please feel free to do that. It can only help you. It can't hurt you. So this week's work could be a little bit confusing. The lecture can be a little bit confusing. Understanding what others do in departments that you've never really worked with before probably, and understanding how you can help them mitigate risk. But that is what enterprise security risk management is all about. Diving deep into the organization, finding out what really makes the organization at risk, and fixing those things rather than just throwing up the guns and the guards and the gates. If you have questions, please text, call, write. The official instrument for us to communicate is the SRU mail. However, if you want to write me an email, I would suggest that you text me and just let me know to check my email. I do check it several times a day. It does pop up on my phone, but text messages pop up right away, and I usually answer those right away. So, anytime you really want to get my attention, text is the way to do it. I've not heard from too many of you. I've heard for a couple, but not too many. But please feel free to reach out. I'd like to have some feedback as to how you think things are going even this early in the course. With that, have a great week, and I look forward to seeing your discussions.